Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to jump into something completely different?
Always up for a challenge. What do you have for us today?
Well, today we're going to explore something pretty unique, the world of Latvian DJs.
Latvian DJs.
Yeah, specifically in the Soviet era. So we're talking like the 70s and 80s. Behind the Iron Curtain. It's a scene that a lot of people probably don't know much about, but it's actually a really fascinating story of, creativity and resilience.
That's cool. I'm intrigued already.
I knew you'd be into this one. So, our main source for this deep dive is an interview with Modris Skaistkalns.
Okay.
He's also known as Mr. Tape, and he was right there in the thick of it.
So what kind of insights does he give us into this scene?
Well, he talks about how even though Western music was basically contraband in Soviet Latvia, there was this underground network of music lovers who found ways to share and experience these forbidden sounds.
Makes sense. Music always finds a way.
Exactly. And one of the key figures in this network was a guy named Lipinsk's. Apparently, he was legendary for his high-quality bootleg tapes.
Bootleg tapes.
Yeah, like recordings of Western music that he somehow managed to get his hands on. And these tapes were like gold. They were traded and shared like precious treasures.
Wow, so this Lipinsk guy was like a musical hero in the underground.
Pretty much. And Mr. Tape actually had a relative who was hooked into this scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he had this amazing setup with top-notch equipment and a stash of Lipinsk's tapes.
I can only imagine what that must have been like.
Right. It's like having access to a secret world, this exclusive club of music lovers.
I bet.
And it's interesting to think about how that scarcity, that lack of easy access to Western music, actually shaped the Latvian DJ scene.
How so?
Well, it forced these DJs to be incredibly resourceful. They had to make the most of what they had. And that led to some really unique innovations.
Innovations like...
Well, for example, Mr. Tape talks about how he would meticulously record his favorite tracks from these Lipinsk's tapes, making sure to capture every minute of music. Because, tapes were valuable. You couldn't just go out and buy a new one.
Right, so they had to be very selective.
Exactly. And that kind of resourcefulness really pushed them to experiment and come up with new techniques.
That makes sense. Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Totally. And speaking of invention, we have to talk about Mr. Tape's slodzushi.
Slodzushi.
Yeah, it's a Latvian word that basically means switches.
Switches?
Yeah, like electrical switches. You see, Mr. Tape was obsessed with scratching, like the kind of scratching DJs do on turntables.
Okay.
But turntables were hard to come by in Latvia at the time.
Oh, I can imagine.
So he had to improvise.
So how did he do it?
Well, he got his hands on a smuggled VHS tape of a London DJ championship, and he was blown away by the scratching techniques.
Wow.
He wanted to do that, but he couldn't. Not with the standard Soviet turntable. So what did he do?
I'm guessing the slodzushi come into play here.
Exactly. He figured out a way to rig his tape decks with these special switches that would interrupt the playback.
So he was basically hacking his tape decks.
Yeah, you could say that. He was a real DIY innovator.
That's incredible.
And the crazy thing is, it actually worked.
Wait, so he was scratching on a tape deck?
Yep. He created these switches that allowed him to manipulate the tape playback and create sounds similar to scratching on a turntable.
Wow, I would love to have seen that.
Oh, people were blown away when he first premiered this technique at a DJ championship pre-selection. No one had ever seen anything like it before.
That's amazing. It just goes to show you how this combination of scarcity and passion can lead to some truly groundbreaking innovations.
I agree. It's like they say, when there's a will, there's a way. And these Latvian DJs, they definitely had the will.
And they found their own way. It's an inspiring story, really.
It is, and we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore.
I'm excited to hear more.
Well, before we jump into that, there's one more important influence we need to talk about.
Okay.
A musician named Einars Milavs, he had this group called Diskotoka Pui, and they were pretty popular in Latvia at the time.
So how did they influence Mr. Tape?
Well, Mr. Tape talks about how Milavs had this incredible stage presence, this real showmanship that went beyond just playing music.
I see.
It seems like that inspired Mr. Tape to think about the performative aspects of DJing, not just the technical skills.
So it's not just about what you play, but how you play it.
Exactly. It's about creating an experience for the audience.
That makes sense. It's like the difference between just reading a story
Yeah.
and actually performing it on stage.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's interesting to think about how those early influences, both from the underground scene and from more mainstream acts like Milavs, shaped Mr. Tape's approach to DJing.
Definitely. It all adds to the mix.
Right. And speaking of mixing, Mr. Tape eventually landed a gig with a group called Diskotoka Beta, which sounds like it was a step up from school dances and into more professional territory.
So he was starting to make a name for himself.
Yeah, he was gaining experience and building his reputation, but it wasn't all smooth sailing.
What do you mean?
Well, he mentions having to navigate some national tensions within the audience.
National tensions.
Yeah, particularly between Latvians and Russians.
Oh, I see.
Remember, this was still during the Soviet era, and there were a lot of underlying political and social dynamics at play.
That must have been challenging.
It was. Imagine trying to create a unified, positive atmosphere through music while dealing with those underlying tensions.
I can see how that would be tricky.
It definitely adds another layer to the story, doesn't it?
It does. We're not just talking about music here. We're talking about culture, identity, and navigating a complex political landscape.
Exactly. And it makes you appreciate the role DJs played in creating spaces for people to come together and share a common experience.
Absolutely.
So we've got this foundation of scarcity, ingenuity, and navigating a tricky social landscape. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's delve into Mr. Tape's transition from DJing to music production, a move that mirrored a global trend at the time. We'll explore what drove this shift and how his early experiences shaped his approach to creating music.
Sounds good to me. Let's see what Mr. Tape has to say about this next chapter in his career. Last time we left off with Mr. Tape starting to make a name for himself as a DJ in Latvia.
Yeah, getting those gigs with Diskotoka Beta must have been a pretty exciting time.
It was, but he wasn't content with just DJing. He wanted to do more.
More like what?
Well, he was really inspired by Western DJ producers, those guys who were not only skilled DJs, but also talented music
Oh,
creators.
yeah, those guys were like rock stars.
Exactly. And Mr. Tape saw that as the next level, a way to express himself more fully and create something truly unique.
I see. So he wanted to go from curating music to actually creating it.
That's a great way to put it. And the shift wasn't just about personal ambition. It also reflected a broader change in how DJs were being perceived.
What do you mean?
Well, they were starting to be recognized as artists in their own right, not just performers.
That makes sense. I mean, they were creating these sonic landscapes, these immersive experiences.
Right. And that shift must have been pretty significant, especially in a scene that was still heavily influenced by traditional bands and singers.
I can imagine. It was like a whole new way of thinking about music.
And Mr. Tape was right at the forefront of this movement. He was one of the pioneers of electronic music in Latvia.
Wow.
And he wasn't doing it alone. He talks about collaborating with other DJs and technicians, people like Voldemars, who helped him perfect those sladzishi, and it was Karklish, who was also experimenting with electronic music and rap.
So the real community effort.
It was. They were learning from each other, pushing each other to experiment, and sharing resources, which was especially important in those days when resources were scarce.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. And that collaborative spirit is really evident in Mr. Tape's early music projects, like FNS.
FNS.
Yeah. He describes it as this blend of DIY techniques and influences from Western dance music.
So it was like a fusion of local and global sounds.
Exactly.
I'm curious about that balance.
Yeah.
How did he manage to create something that felt authentically Latvian while still drawing inspiration from the West?
Well, I think it's about more than just the music itself. It's about the experiences, the stories, the emotions that are embedded in the sound.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Mr. Tape was drawing from his own life, his own understanding of the Latvian experience to create something that felt both personal and universal.
That's interesting.
And that personal touch really shines through. In his breakthrough hit, Braukamus Rigu, it's this catchy track with a modern sound that resonated with a wide audience.
It even charted, right?
It did. It achieved success on the Microphones music chart.
Microphones.
It was like the Latvian version of Billboard back then.
Oh.
So for Mr. Tate's music to chart there, it meant he was breaking into the mainstream, reaching beyond the niche DJ scene.
That's huge.
It was. It also signified a shift in the Latvian music landscape.
A shift towards a more modern electronic sound.
Exactly. Brakam Uzrigu was a sign that the Latvian audience was ready for something fresh, something that broke away from the traditional pop and rock sounds that had dominated the airwaves for so long.
It was like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, you could say that. And this wasn't just a solo effort. Mr. Tape was also involved in the Latvian Beat compilation.
Latvian Beat.
Yeah, it was this compilation album that showcased various Latvian DJs and their unique styles.
So he was actively promoting the scene.
He was. He was passionate about showcasing the talent and diversity of the Latvian DJ scene.
That's really cool.
And it's clear that his passion paid off because the Latvian electronic music scene was starting to gain some real momentum.
That's great. But I'm curious, with all this success and innovation, was there ever any talk about Latvian DJs breaking through on a global scale?
That's a great question, and it's something that Mr. Tape actually addresses in the interview.
Oh, what does he say?
Well, he believes that achieving global recognition requires more than just talent and good music.
I think that's got to be part of it, right?
It is, but he thinks there needs to be a strong, established base, a well-developed infrastructure that supports the growth of talent.
Okay, I see.
He draws a comparison to Latvian hockey, which has achieved significant success on the international stage.
Yeah, their hockey team is pretty good.
Exactly. And he attributes that success to a strong support system, a network of coaches, trainers, and facilities that helps nurture and develop young talent.
So he felt like the Latvian music scene was lacking that kind of support.
It seems that way. He felt that without a robust music industry, with the right connections, resources, and marketing savvy, it would be difficult for Latvian artists to break through on a global level.
That's a tough reality.
It is, but it's not like he just gave up. He was still determined to find a way to reach a wider audience.
How so?
Well, he decided to make a bold move.
What was that?
He started writing and producing music with English lyrics.
Interesting. So he was trying to make his music more accessible to an international audience.
Exactly.
It's a pretty big step.
It was, and it's something we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm definitely intrigued to hear how that played out.
Last time, we left off with Mr. Tape making a big decision, switching to English lyrics for his music.
Yeah,
A pretty bold move.
definitely a gamble, but he was determined to
Yeah.
reach a wider audience.
It makes you wonder, though, what was going through his mind at the time?
Yeah, was he nervous? Excited?
Probably a bit of both.
It must have been a bit like an athlete training for the Olympics. You've put in the work, you have the skills, but there's still that uncertainty.
Right, that question of, can you perform on the world stage?
Exactly. And for Mr. Tape, this world stage took the form of Simtas Debijas, his new project with English lyrics.
So how did it sound?
Well, it's definitely an evolution from his earlier work. It's more polished, more international. Does he talk about the process of switching to English?
He does. He says it wasn't just about translating his Latvian lyrics, it was about crafting a new sonic identity.
Interesting.
He experimented with different vocal styles and production techniques to create something that felt fresh and contemporary.
And did it pay off?
Well, one of the standout tracks from Simtas Debijas is Day by Day.
Day by day.
And this song actually achieved some remarkable success.
Really?
It got picked up by a Japanese label
Wow.
for their Dance Mania compilation.
That's incredible.
It's amazing to think that a song from Latvia ended up on a compilation album in Japan.
It just goes to show you that music can truly transcend borders.
It really can. And what's even more remarkable is that this success wasn't driven by a big marketing campaign or a big-name producer.
So it was just the power of the music itself.
Exactly. It resonated with listeners across cultures and found an audience on the other side of the world.
That's amazing.
It proved that Mr. Tape's instincts were right. Latvian music could compete on a global scale.
It's an inspiring story.
It is. And he didn't stop there. He continued to explore new territories, collaborating with other artists, and pushing his creative boundaries.
What else did he do?
Well, he formed a group called MTAO, released a solo album called Gaisa, and even worked with the group BTH on a track called Fantasy Girl.
So he was constantly evolving.
He was always searching for new sounds and new ways to express himself.
That's really cool.
And he talks about how his DJing experience, those years spent reading crowds and crafting sets, directly influenced his approach to music production.
Makes sense. As a DJ, you're thinking about how to build energy, create tension, release it at the right moment.
Exactly. Those are skills that translate directly to songwriting, arranging music.
It's all about creating an experience for the listener.
And that's what Mr. Tape was a master of, both as a DJ and as a producer.
Yeah, he really left his mark on the Latvian music scene.
He did. And his story is a reminder that great music can emerge from unexpected places.
It really is.
It's a story about creativity, resilience, and the power of music to transcend borders.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree. So, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Latvian DJ history. I hope you enjoyed this journey as much as we did.
It's been a real eye-opener.
And hopefully it's inspired you to explore some new music.
There's a whole world of sound out there.
So keep listening, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.